Hello and welcome to my last evidence for this course. My name is Luis Eugenio Córdoba Cervantes, and I'm going to talk to you about the solution for one of the challenges of globalizations that I would like to tackle. So, I would like to start my introduction by stating that there is a great number of religions around the world that have a similar idea to reincarnation, a concept typically defined as a form of rebirth or an incarnation into a different state, into a different form. Um, However, this concept doesn't seem to apply or have much implication over the modern issue of waste. Why do we have a rebirth to humanity, but not something as simple as the waste we generate? So I'm going to start with the statement of my challenge, which is reduction of ocean pollution. So we first wanted to focus on the challenge at hand. As a citizen to an industry-focused metropolitan city, I have experienced pollution in my everyday life, and the streets I walk on, they are decorated with the butts of cigarettes, and the sky I look at every day, it's flooded with smog, and the air I breathe can cause allergies to my skin when I shave it. And so these effects do bother me on a daily basis, but they are far from the most catastrophic results that pollution can have in the modern day. So this is the reason why I want to focus on what's ultimately life below water and the response and a responsible consumption and production. So I'm going to back this up with a little bit of data and statistics. Of course, we get a lot of this data from this website of ocean literacy, and on this exact page and about ocean plastic pollution in this year of 2022. So first of all, we've got that 17% of the affected by this pollution of this oceanic pollution. 17% of the species affected by this are at risk of extinction. We have about 50 to 75 trillion pieces of plastics and microplastics in the ocean, and some experts say that by 2050, plastics will weigh more than fish in the ocean. We also can also state safely that around 100% of all plastics ever made are still in existence. We also know that about 10% of those plastics in existence right now are actually being recycled. And lastly, we also know that it takes more than 1,000 years for plastics to degrade properly. Um, so having all of this in mind will hopefully help you sort of state and focus the just a massive amount of scale that this problem can have. Um, Now, to explain a little bit more about this issue, I would like to explore the different points of view that are attacked and that are affected by this challenge, and I will do so in this geocultural sort of analysis with this sort of open-minded um, point of view. So I want to first state sort of the place where I'm placing this attention. I'm discussing, of course, of pollution in the oceans, but what exactly is this place that is being polluted? What is the ocean? Well, of course, that's a very big question, and along with it, there's a very big answer, one that I am not exactly a professional on. However, the ocean is what constitutes most of the world's surface. That is something that we can all agree on, and been um, that's been documented. Uh, so having the ocean being the largest surface in the world, it's of course it of course affects us directly. One of the ways in which it affects us is that, of course, it supplies us with most of the water we use to um, sustain ourselves and the life that accompanies us in the earthly, in the sort of terrestrial terrains. And so, whilst we affect with this pollution our oceans, with having our plastics just lying there and becoming microplastics. Eventually, they make their way back to us into our soils, into our food, into our water. And now, with this sort of process, we can start to see how it affects us in our health and in a more direct way, something that wasn't very noticeable even a couple of years ago. So this is something very recent and that can be a possible life-threatening situation for each individual. So, lastly, what is the ocean for us as humans of members of cities and nations and different nations? Well, we now can tell that the use of the ocean surface and the ocean in general, it can either end up becoming this sort of chaotic individualistic type of management that is dedicated to each individual that traverse or moves around in the ocean. We can see this with sort of piracy and um, which of course sounds like a bit of a outdated and very um, old timey situation, but it is a sort of threat nowadays. But most importantly, it's sort of the way we move our products from nation to nation. It can be destructive and counterproductive. A couple of recent examples would be a situation that happened in the Nile River, um, where just one boat doing a sort of um, malfunctioning maneuver um, ended up being a sort of more global disaster. Um, However, just as much as it could be this sort of chaotic, individualistic type of management, it could also be a constructive and cooperative alliance that could aim to protect and preserve, as well as respect the sort of health that our environment has. Now, the type of power relationships and power relations that we could observe in this type of issues are basically divided into dominant and resistive, right? So, as a dominant sort of power, we can locate the customers and the governments because, first of all, the customers, because they have this purchasing power, which means that whatever trend the customers develop will guide the way that companies develop their products. So, for a long time, customers have always wanted what's most convenient, what's cheapest, what's better for them. What was better for them was the convenience of having this one use disposable market. Oh, pardon me. And that's something that the companies have taken advantage of. And one other thing that leads the company's actions um, outside of this customer purchasing power It's the regulations from the different governments. I'm sorry, I'm sick right now and I keep coughing. But ethnicity is something very important in this case, since developed countries tend to exploit the poorer countries with their cheap labor. Now, at last, I want to talk about my proposal. I want to propose a sort of management similar to something that's already been implemented in Mexico to sort of try to regulate uh, the health healthy eating habits of the citizens. I want to have a norm that I can push forward with local governments at first and then scale it up to nationwide government to force companies to be transparent with their um, products and the type of risks and issues that the products can present to the environment. So I want to have this sort of um, guiding force that can aim to change um, sort of market trends by encouraging this transparency from the companies to the consumer about the sort of disposability of their products. How much danger does this product present to the ocean? I think that having that is something that is informative to the consumers, and having it be a regulated norm, it sort of guarantees that the consumers will be somewhat informed about their purchasing decisions. And since we've already seen trends aiming towards more eco-friendly products, having this sort of um, certification that a product is less harmful is something that's going to drive the market, at least at a small a niche way, but it's um, evidently it could end up being something more encouraging to companies to meet the criteria for the type of plastics they can use to sell their products in their um, and their packaging. So I want to talk about the sort of stakeholders then that we have identified on this proposal, where they are basically the government. With our proposal, we're aiming to convince the government to implement our norms, to have this sort of, let me go back here, to have this type of scale and signaling to the consumer about their the habits of a um, company. Now, what sort of power dynamic is present between these stakeholders? But of course, uh, the branch of government that we are working with, that we are aiming to work with, it's definitely a more dominant relationship regarding the organizations and companies that are trying to sell stuff in the area of the government. Simply because the government just establishes the rules that companies have to follow in order to sell their products. Companies are, in this case, motivated by wanting to generate profit by selling their products in a market that is regulated by the government. So, in order to meet their goal, they have to pass through these regulations. And having these regulations favor transparency in information can also help motivate the sort of demand from the consumers to also move the companies towards a more um, a more sort of litter free products, something that it won't end up polluting the oceans, and ideally not be packaged in plastic. This idea of the throwaway plastic is something very important. Um, Lastly, what kind of resources are we trying to gather for this normative? Well, we know that to have this norm, to have our norm become part of the federal government's norms, we have to submit our idea to the national normalization program to have it approved for a federal agency to then form a national normative consultancy committee that would form a project to then test the normative. Um, then the normative would be posted on the official journal of the Federation for it to be consulted during 60 days, about 2 months. And during this 2 months, 60 days, it's going to be consulted to see if been a good idea or not. So, again, we submit to the National Normalization Program. It is then um, formed as a project by the federal agency and a committee. And lastly, it's consulted for 60 days. So, lastly, in conclusion, I believe that a functioning society and the trends of their market is based on the aspects of its culture. It is something that's been studied in social and cultural psychology, and it was a primary reason for my developing of this proposal. Uh, this proposal has also made me question my role as a professional or a citizen in a culturally globalized world, um, which I hope and I aim to develop into a sort of lifestyle that can be more sustainable. And I also want to aim my my role into the more of a influential one that can influence the people near to me, close to me, and the communities that I inhabit. Lastly, these are the references I used for my um, creation, for my proposal, and I thank you for your time. Um, I have loved this class. Thank you.